The case for an intellectual revolution in Rwanda. I am thinking out loud, and it hurts them. Written by Gabriel Ndayishimiye. Published by LivenBooks. Section 8. Thinking Beyond Hutu, Tutsi, and Twa. To imagine a truly free Rwanda is to reject the colonial categories of Hutu, Tutsi, and Twa, instruments long wielded by regimes eager to divide, rule, and claim dominion over memory and belonging. Mahmoud Mamdani, in his seminal work When Victims Become Killers, argues that these identities were not fixed historical truths, but colonial inventions designed to stratify and manage populations. Pre-colonial Rwandan society was more fluid, with social categories based on wealth, power, and occupation, rather than immutable ethnic lines. And yet, in the present, many Rwandans stubbornly cling to these colonial artifacts as though they were carved into the bedrock of time. What they know and understand about identity are not reasoned truths, but emotional relics, passed from one fearful generation to the next, unquestioned and unrevised. This obstinate adherence is not born of critical education, but of inherited trauma, ritualized through family whispers and national dogma. Paulo Freire observed that the oppressed often internalize their oppression, clinging to the familiar structures of domination because freedom feels more terrifying than the known chains of subjugation. This fear of freedom ensures that many Rwandans, rather than interrogating the artificiality of these identities, find comfort in their emotional legacies. It is a comfort rooted in fear, a fear cultivated by generations who have never been taught to think beyond imposed boundaries, but only to survive within them. It is a loyalty to chains long broken elsewhere, yet lovingly polished and worn here as badges of false belonging. These shifting social relations reveal a society in constant negotiation with itself, one that resisted the rigidity now imposed upon it. Yet today, Rwandans often wear their inherited categories like sacred garments, stitched together by fear and unquestioned loyalty. It is not curiosity that preserves these identities, but a collective refusal to confront the past with intellectual honesty. This stubbornness masquerades as cultural fidelity, when in truth it is a symptom of an education system devoid of critical engagement, a system that rewards memorization over interrogation, compliance over critique. The colonial state, particularly under Belgian rule, institutionalized these identities, turning them into rigid markers of political belonging. Identity cards were introduced, and with them, the myth of ethnic essence became law. Post-independence leaders, rather than dismantling this colonial legacy, inherited and zealously reinforced it, finding in it a ready-made architecture for control. Their project was not to heal, but to reconfigure the colonial gaze into a new doctrine of obedience, turning the people into custodians of their own subjugation. The 1994 genocide was the catastrophic culmination of this identity politics. Mamdani insists the challenge confronting post-genocide Rwanda is not mere reconciliation between Hutu and Tutsi, but the unraveling of the very fabric that rendered these categories as political weapons. Citizenship must be redefined, not in ethnic terms, but in civic and political ones. As long as Rwandans continue to see themselves primarily through these colonial lenses, true liberation remains out of reach. To think beyond Hutu, Tutsi, and Twa is to excavate a Rwandan identity buried beneath layers of imposed histories, one rooted in a shared becoming rather than a frozen past. It is to understand that the persistence of these categories serves the interests of those in power, who manipulate history to maintain control. Breaking free demands a rupture with the inherited narratives, a refusal to carry forward the burdens of imposed identities. It calls for the creation of a future that remembers without fossilizing, that recognizes difference as texture, not fracture. Intellectuals, artists, and activists carry the burden and the promise of this reimagining. Amiable Karasira, through his outspoken critiques of Rwandan politics and historical narratives, embodies this role. His challenges to the state's use of ethnic identity and his insistence on open dialogue highlight the necessity of questioning official truths. Karasira's voice, like those of other critical thinkers, urges a re-examination of Rwandan identity beyond imposed divisions and towards a more inclusive and honest reckoning with history. Through history, literature, and political thought, they must challenge the foundational myths of the Rwandan state and open space for new ways of belonging. Kizito Mihigo, in his song Igisoba Nuro Siurupfu, the meaning of death, offers a poignant compliment to Mamdani's critique. Mihigo's philosophy transcends the binary of Hutu and Tutsi, emphasizing a shared human suffering and the need for inclusive remembrance. He sings of a mourning that is not selective, a grief that acknowledges all victims, regardless of their official ethnic designation. His vision is one of reconciliation, rooted not in state narratives, but in the personal and collective experience of loss and dignity. Like Mamdani, Mihigo rejects the instrumentalization of identity and urges Rwandans to reclaim a sense of belonging that is not defined by historical impositions, but by mutual recognition and solidarity. This refusal is not an erasure of identity, but a reclamation of it from the machinery that renders identity a weapon of governance. Innocent Bahati, through his poignant poetry, engages deeply with themes of memory, identity, and repression. His verses question the selective remembrance enforced by the state and explore the personal cost of living under an identity that is politically manipulated. Bahati's creative work serves as a powerful act of resistance, offering a vision of identity that is rooted in human experience rather than imposed categories. His disappearance, like that of many critical voices, is a stark reminder of the dangers faced by those who dare to reimagine identity outside the lines drawn by power. The repression extends beyond Bahati. Journalists such as Cassian Ntamuhanga, poet Gasasira Deo, and singer Kizito Mihigo have all faced imprisonment, forced disappearances, or death for challenging state narratives. These cases illustrate a broader pattern where intellectual curiosity and creative dissent are met with swift and brutal silencing, reinforcing a culture of fear that stifles the very foundation of free thought. The intellectual revolution in Rwanda must therefore enact a radical disavowal of imposed identity. Kagame does not guarantee identity, for he is no giver of selfhood, no divine architect of belonging. He is instead the most malevolent specter to haunt Rwanda's history, a builder of illusions, a craftsman of political phantoms. He must go. And when he does, his departure must carry with it every thread of his fabricated unity, every stitch of his designed obedience, every ghostly script of Ndumunyarwanda. His regime, a grotesque monument to domination, belongs not to memory, but to the grave, or to whatever unrelenting abyss dictators descend, pursued by the restless echoes of their crimes. Let karma, in its most unmerciful form, reclaim him, for Rwanda can no longer afford to breathe under the weight of his spectral presence. His vision, a distortion of what could have been a collective rebirth, must be exorcised from the nation's soul. The intellectual revolution must not dismantle these epistemologies of conquest. It must burn their blueprints, sever their roots, and plant in their place the wild, unruly seeds of emancipation, seeds that flourish in defiance, watered by the truths long buried beneath Kagame's edifice of fear. It must expose the colonial roots of ethnic divisions and offer alternatives grounded in justice, equality, and participation. Only then can Rwanda escape the choreography of managed unity and step into the precarious but necessary space of authentic solidarity, where voices no longer echo directives but generate new horizons. The experiences of South Africa's Truth and Reconciliation process, though imperfect, show how truth-telling can foster solidarity beyond managed narratives. In post-dictatorship Chile, the grassroots intellectual awakenings that followed Pinochet's fall serve as a powerful testament to the resilience of civil society. There, despite decades of brutal repression, artists, writers, and ordinary citizens began to carve out spaces of memory and resistance, reasserting the value of truth in public discourse. They engaged in public art, community education, and alternative histories to reclaim agency from a state that had rendered them voiceless. Similarly, Rwanda must recognize that its path forward lies in these collective acts of intellectual defiance, where the memory of the past is neither suppressed nor weaponized, but harnessed to build a future anchored in shared humanity. Rwanda must learn from these movements, embracing the idea that solidarity arises not from enforced unity, but from the courageous engagement of diverse truths. This vision finds further resonance in the work of Amartya Sen, who argues in Identity and Violence that the reduction of individuals to a single imposed identity leads to conflict and limits human freedom. Sen emphasizes the multiplicity of identity, that people belong to many communities and categories at once, and that fostering these plural affiliations is essential for peace and development. Applying this to Rwanda, intellectuals must reject entirely the colonial and post-colonial imposition of ethnic identity and call for a radical reimagining of belonging. It is not enough to nuance or reform these categories. They must be discarded as relics of domination. This revolution is not an omission of history, but a declaration that no citizen must live under the shadow of inherited labels. Rwandans must claim the freedom to self-identify, to name themselves without fear, to exist without being measured against the dictates of political expediency. Akile Mbembe urges a politics of life, and in Rwanda, this means annihilating the frameworks of ethnic fatalism. No longer should life be weighed against the state's necropolitical arithmetic of who matters. Instead, a future must emerge where individuals, unbound, create themselves anew in complexity, in freedom, and in defiance of a history that sought to write them in blood. This reimagining of identity demands a radical ontological break, as argued by Frantz Fanon, who insisted that the post-colonial subject must not simply inherit a cleansed version of the colonial world, but must invent new ways of being. To reimagine Rwandan identity is to enter what Homi Bhabha calls a third space, where hybridity allows for negotiation beyond fixed binaries. It is here that identity becomes dynamic, shaped by lived experience and individual agency rather than by state edicts or ancestral shackles. This future identity refuses the nostalgia of purity or unity and embraces the disorderly, fertile chaos of becoming. It invites every Rwandan to step into authorship of their own story, refusing to let history be dictated by victors or regimes.